Hello folks, and welcome to the next video in our series on Introduction to Computing using a Grok Learning course. This time we're going to be looking at Module 2 in our series, which is not working anymore. Okay, hello folks, welcome to the next video in our series on our Introduction to Computing course using the Grok Learning online Python course. This time we are going to be looking at the second module, which is called Calculating Things. So this is all about using programs to perform certain calculations, which is a very common thing we do in programming all the time. Very few programs would have no calculations in them whatsoever. So the things that we need to know to be able to write these sorts of programs and include this stuff is certainly an understanding of the different arithmetic operators that are available to us to use in writing our program code. Most of these will look very similar to you. Certainly in the addition and the subtraction operators, you've been using those since like grade 2 maths or something. So there's nothing unusual there. The multiplication operator looks a bit different to what you're used to using. The X key on a keyboard in a computer is already in use. It already has a job, performs the X letter. So we can't use that for multiplication because the computer won't know, do you mean the letter X or are you using some sort of symbol? So we have to replace that with a different symbol, and that symbol is the asterisk, that we use that to represent multiplication, and that's consistent across all computing applications. Likewise, division, your normal division operator, the horizontal line with the two dots, top and bottom, that character doesn't exist on your keyboard, so we needed a character to represent that, and the forward slash is the character that we use. And another one that we might see as we do our Module 2 stuff is to the power of, so representing a number squared or cubed, for instance. 2 asterisks represents to the power of. So they're the main arithmetic operators that we need to be familiar with at this stage, and we're going to do some programming and write some programs where we use those to do different things. One of the things you need to remember though is that your order of operations rules that you're used to using in maths, they also apply in programming. Nothing changes there. Here you're seeing an order of operations acronym called BODMAS. You might be familiar with maybe BOMDAS, where the D and the M for the division and multiplication are around the other way. That's because those operations can be dealt with in reverse order, in the BOMDAS order, whichever one you get to first. It doesn't matter whether you do division or multiplication first, as long as you do them both after the brackets and after the powers and before the addition and subtraction. So those acronyms really help you, and they apply in our programming also. So if we look at some sample programs, and we'll look at a couple of examples here, and here we've got 2 variables. We've got a variable called num1, and it's got a value set to 5. We've got a variable called num2, and it's got a value set to 4. They are both numeric variables. We know that because they're not contained, the values aren't contained inside quotes, so they're not strings, they're numbers. If we use a print command and have num1 plus num2, you might guess that what's the output that we're going to see is the value 9, because it's going to add those 2 numbers together. That's a pretty obvious thing that's going to happen. But what if we have the same 2 variables, but instead of having numeric variables, numeric values, we make them strings. So the number 5 is a string and the number 4 is a string. What's going to happen now when we do the same thing and add them to try and add them together? Are we going to get the same output? Are we going to get 9 still? Well, we actually don't. We get a very different output, and we get 54. So obviously 5 plus 4 definitely isn't 54. But if you join them together, like what we do with strings, that's exactly what we get, because that's all that's happening. The values are just being joined together. When you add 2 strings, the plus doesn't act as a plus operator. It's acting as what's called a concatenation operator and joining things together. So the plus symbol can have different roles depending on the situation. In this case, it's different whether we're working with numeric variables versus working with string variables. Okay, so you need to understand that and the behavior and the output you're going to get depending on the type of variables that you are working with. We'll also start to see a number of what we call functions and special functions start to be used in our programming. So functions are really helpful because they help us do certain things in our programs without us having to write extra code to make this stuff happen. So these things are commands. So they come up purple in the Groq Online environment, like all other commands do. And you're going to use a few different ones that do some different things. So we're going to have a look at some of those examples. And the first one is going to be the len function. When you use a function, you see it written not unlike the print command that we've seen, where you've got the command followed by a set of brackets, and that's how we use them. Normally we'll have things inside those brackets, but they don't have to be. Sometimes you'll see it used without those, but normally they will have something in them. The len function, len is short for length. So it just allows us to find the length of a string. And if we have a look at an example here, where we're printing and we're using the len function and we're printing hello world with an exclamation mark. All that's going to, the len function is just going to have a look at that string that we're printing and tell us how many characters there are. If you have a quick look and add those together, see what number you might get. A lot of people say 11 here because they count the letters and they count the exclamation mark and count that as 11. What they forget though is that a space is a character. That is a valid character and we need to make sure we count those as well. The int function is another one we'll see. Int is short for integer. And you should know from maths that an integer is just a whole number. So when we use the int function, all we're doing is converting a string to a whole number, or making sure that a number is being treated as a number instead of a string, probably to make sure we can use it properly in a calculation. So as a quick example, there's a couple of lines there. We've got a variable called num, and we're saying that num we're asking for input from the user, and we're asking them to enter a number. So obviously we want that to be treated as a number and not a string. So a way to make sure that that number will be treated as a number is to use the int function and put our number variable inside that. So that means when the user gives us a value, that's going to be ensure that we treat that as a number, and so that we can use it in calculations. Likewise, str function is short for string. It does the reverse. It treats a number as a string. So if we want to just include a number in a output in a string, like in a sentence, we don't need that number to be a numeric variable. We need it to be treated as a string. So we can enforce that. So for example, if we've got the value of the variable answer and it's got a numeric value of 5, but we want to include that in a string, then we can do that by outputting it with the string the answer is, and then we're adding the value of our answer variable, but we're using the string function to ensure that that just gets treated as a string, and it's just going to join that into the rest of my string, and the output it's going to give me is the answer is 5, with 5 as the number, because that's the value of our answer variable.